Hi everyone, welcome back. This is I'll still say the first video in the Python Flask series because we count from zero, right? So now in this first video, we are going to begin and dive into Python Flask, write our first Python Flask application, and get to know how the code works. So we're going to be using a folder, the lecture one folder, just for the sake of this. Now let's create a new file called app.py. Now this app.py will be our main Python file for this Python Flask project. But before we go there, let's first create a virtual environment because it's not safe to just keep writing your code and running it in the default Python environment. That makes it very hard on dependencies. Because when you begin to work on a lot of projects and you have a lot of dependencies, you want to know which versions you are using for your project in order to avoid dependency issues. So first, I'll just go ahead and create a virtual environment in my folder currently. So I'll say Python 3 -m venv. Then now the arguments that comes after now is the name of my virtual environment, so I cannot say anything for this. I can say my env or whatever I want, and that will work fine. So if you are using Windows, you would actually just ignore this 3. Thus Python will work fine. And also if you are using Linux and this is raising some errors, it's most likely because your virtual environment is not installed, so you go ahead and install that. So let's just run this command now to create a new virtual environment. Now let me just break this virtual environment down for you. The virtual environment is like a secluded or separated or isolated runtime of Python, environment of Python that you are running on your device. So this makes us enable to like check the versions or the list, the entire list of packages that we installed to run this project. So now, given that we can actually check the list of packages we installed to run this project and their specific version numbers, that means we cannot share this in a file with someone else trying to run a project, and that would mean we'll have no dependency errors. So that's why we have all of that. So now we're having like bin directory, and now this activates is the file that we need to run to activate this virtual environment. So now as you can see, it's already active, but let me just go ahead and deactivate it first. So deactivate. This was one I was using from before. So now let me reactivate my virtual environment. So you run the source command, source venv bin, then activate. Sorry, my env is actually the name I used. So my env. Remember, if you used a different name for the previous command, so you just used my env there instead. So now you can see now we have the my env has been activated. So now that's why it's showing before my terminal. Now when I run deactivate, I'm simply deactivating it. So I'll just run deactivate. Now you see it's gone. So now let's reactivate it. So now on Windows also, Windows is a little different. So for Windows users, just run / whatever name you used for your environment. So I will say my env again, and then scripts, capital S for the first one, scripts, and then activate. And this will work fine for Windows devices. So now let's cancel this and go ahead and begin running our project. So first we need to install Flask. Now I'll just say pip install Flask. So now you can see Flask has been installed alongside its dependencies, Ginger template, as you know, Ginger template same and the like. So let's get into it and create our first Flask application. Now first we need to import Flask. So I would say from Flask import Flask. Now we would initialize our Flask application using a variable. We can call this variable whatever we want. So I'll just say app equals Flask __ name. Now this app can be whatever you want. It can be main, it can be API, or whatever you want your Flask application to be called. Now let's go ahead and define a route. So I would say app.route, and then we have, so this is like the default route of our project. So we have like whenever we go to a domain name without any route, so that's what this one is for. Now we have to define a function. So I would say def index and say you return simple as hello world. Now this is a very simple Flask application. Let me just break it down before we go on. So now we have the default like root route of our project, and now we also have a function. So what we're basically doing is we are linking these routes to this function. So So what it means is whenever we visit our URL or our server, it's going to call this function, and this function will run and return to us. If you're familiar with functions in Python, this should be very easy for you. So now let's go ahead and run our Flask project. So what we just need to do is run Flask, run. And now you can see we have running on localhost 127.0.0. Just click this and visit this in your browser, and then you would see the response. Now we have hello world, which is the response of the function that we have here. Now there's still a few things we need to do, but first we can see now it's working. We have a simple Flask application that is actually making things show inside of our web browser. Now let's go on and make some changes. So just let's say for sakes, you have your Python file in different name. Let's rename our Python file just to see what happens this time. Let me say main.py. Now when I run Flask run, we're having some errors because the Python Flask by default is designed to look for files using a specific name. Now as you can see, it's looking for wsgi.py or app.py. But now that we have main.py, something is wrong. So in order to avoid that, let's just go ahead and make some changes, like if underscore name equals main app.run. Now using this, we can now just simply run Python and then name our Python file .py, and now we have the same response. So now we've been able to run our Python code using any file now. So any file that we create will work fine with our Python Flask API, Flask application. Sorry. Now when I go to the browser and run this again, still working fine. I can change this, James. Now let me go back to my terminal and my web browser and reload this. But now we still have hello world, even though we've changed something in our Python file. So that means we just have to restart this server once again for these changes to take effect. Now when I should reload my page, now we have hello James. But you can see where this starts to get annoying. When you begin to write code, like continuously update your code, you don't want to go to the terminal all the time and just run restart. That's annoying. So now let's add some arguments to our Flask application. So let's say debug equals true. Now debug equals true is basically we are allowing some new features of Flask to now work. Now let's get to it. Let's say I restart my code now. It's still working fine, but there's some changes in this place. First, let's just try to pass this response. Now we have Flask app main. Now this is stating that the Flask application that we are running is in our main.py file. It has the same name. Right now you can see here, previously it was showing debug is off, but now it's on because we've changed it to true. Also, this is a development server, blah blah blah. Let's just leave that. Now we are seeing the running on. So now this is the link to where our Python Flask is running. So we can just follow this to visit our web application. But also you can see here Control-C to quit. So that means whenever I want to stop this server, I just need to run Control-C, and then that would stop. Right. So now the next thing to do is you notice some changes here. Before we just have running on and then that's all. But now you can see restarting with start. Because debug equals true, it automatically reads and continues to read this file. Whenever it notices any change, it automatically updates the server, which means we don't have to come here and restart over and over again. So now let's restart the server once again. We have it working exactly the same. So now when I make some changes here, let's say no, hello Jarvis. Now you would notice here it has automatically reloaded. Now I can just go to the web browser and say reload, and that works perfectly fine. So now let's get to it. Let's add some more routes to our Python Flask application. Let's say app.routes. Nope. Test. And let's say definition test return. Now note, you can basically return anything you want. Let's even try to return some HTML. So we can just say h1 and this is a test. Close the h1 tag. So now when I go back to my, let's see the server's build actually. Okay, this is because of the errors that were occurring while we were editing the code. So let me just restart the server again and now go back to the browser. This is still working exactly the same, but now because we added a route, which is the slash test, we can now go to the web browser and do something like this slash test, not test user. Now you can see here we have in an H1 like a very big text. This is a test, so it's basically the same response that we have here, but it's now showing in HTML format because that's what we wrote there. So now you can see it's basically replicating whatever we do back here in the Flask application. So we can add more routes. We can do some other cool things like define, let's say, test. There, let's add a new route. Add app dot route. So let's say slash hello. Now define return hello. So now this means we can also now go back. This has restarted. So we can also now go back and visit the hello route. So now let's say hello. And now this is also working fine. Well, now let's try to add a feature that we can just append any like name we want to the end of this route. So let's do something like this. Let's say slash name. Now, what this is basically doing is it allows us to add what we call a route parameter, which means we can append any string we want after this hello route, and then we'll be able to access the content of the text that we provide there. So let's do something like this. Now we've been able to say that. Let's say name, and now let's add the format string. Now we can just say name. Now let's see what happens now. Now you can see we have not found. Now this is because we didn't now we don't really have any routes that matches this hello dot slash h slash hello again, because now we are supposed to have something right after the hello, like whatever I want, like James. Now we have hello James. I put something else like Jarvis. Jarvis is there working fine. So now basically anything you type will be read by the code. And now you can see hello Akweoluwa. So now what this does is this is like creating a variable, really. So now we are allowing, this syntax allows us to append any string that we want to the end of a route, and now we can access that string using this function by passing it as a parameter to this function. Now we have the name, and then we are using the name right here as in hello. But what if we want to allow this to also work? So then we have to make some changes to the code. So now what we need to learn here is, even though, you know, like if you check all of these blocks now, we just have a route linked to a function. One route, one function. But we can also add two routes to the same function. So let's try to do something like that. Let's add one more route. So let's say app dot route hello. Now since we are adding hello, and now we are not, like, we are saying that we don't need to provide the variable anymore. So now in this case we need to add a, but before that, let's just try to run this and see what actually happens. Now we have two different routes linked to the same function. So now when I reload this, no, now you can see we have an error. Now this error is displaying like this using this HTML stuff because we have debug equals to true. So if I should just go back to my code and change this debug to false, or just remove it entirely. Now when I reload my server and try to reload this page, now you cannot see internal server error. Now debug equals true allows us to add like the features to see the contents of the error in the HTML. Meaning it's easier to debug because now you can see some visual like links to what exactly is going on. Let me just restart this. I doubt that's reloaded. Now restarting this, let me go back and reload this again. Now you can see we are seeing the contents of the error. So now hello is missing one required argument, name. Now this is because when we initially defined this, we allowed this route to pass if a an argument to the function. But now, since you are using the name, the hello route without the name, it means the argument will not be there. So now what we just need to do is add like a default value to the argument. So now whenever we run this code again, if we visit this route, we have hello Jarvis. But now when we pass in any arguments like Opeoluwa, for example, now it changes to Opeoluwa. So you can see this automatically working in cases like GitHub, for example, where you can just type in github.com/your username, then to go to your username, and it works for every single GitHub account. So this is one of those ways that make those things possible. It might not be exactly like this, but it's the same format. So you get what I'm saying? So now, one of the things you need to learn about this debug equals true is, let me just try to make an error here just for sakes. Let me say pass. So now when I reload this page, we have the error. But you notice this error is actually going to be showing some information about the contents of your code. Now, you don't want this to happen whenever you are deploying your web application to a server, for example. Because when your web application begins to show information about the code that you are running, that's a security risk, because it might show some blocks of code like this that could cause some errors to some potential people. So you just try to avoid keeping this debug equals true. So as soon as you finish developing your web application, easy, just change this to false. That means whenever an error occurs, all you see is internal server error. It doesn't show any contents of your code or whatever it is, to avoid security risks. So that's basically all for now. We've been able to learn the basics of the Python Flask framework. Thanks so much for watching. Please watch out for the next video. And once again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.